In this video, I want to talk a bit about matching curvature. So whenever you bake out normal maps are really good for capturing detail, but are not good for capturing curvature, which means if you have a low poly mesh that doesn't match the curvature of the high poly mesh, you're usually going to get problematic errors after the bake. So let me show you. Right here I have a curve. As you can see, I'm just going to press Control A, turn it into a mesh, and now we have this thing. So pretend this was your high poly, right? And you wanted to decimate this into a low poly. Actually, what I would usually do, I wouldn't actually do it that way. I would take before you apply the curve, I would actually duplicate it. So that way you can simply adjust the curve settings that way. So pretend this is your high poly right here, and pretend this is your low poly. So for the low poly, I might want to, change some of the curve settings here, drop the resolution a bit. Let's make this pretty low, maybe like that. And then for the geometry, where's bevel? Right here. Resolution we could change a bit, kind of like that. So here is the low poly and here's the high poly. Notice how the curvature is pretty mismatched. This is actually not what we want. A lot of people will try to bake curvature like this thinking it'll actually pick up, when in fact this is simply way too much of a skew. It's not gonna match at all or bake very well, and I want to show you how this looks in Marmoset. We're gonna go over Marmoset later on in the course, so for now I'm just gonna kind of load in these assets simply to show you the issues with bakes on mismatched curvature. So what I'm gonna do is load in these pipes real quick. I'm gonna do this quickly so I'm not wasting time. Okay, so what we have here is our high poly. We can click the H, and the low poly we can click the L. And if I want to preview the bake from the high poly onto the low poly, I simply enable the low poly. I click on the P key. It's going to ask me for an output path, so I'll just use this folder here. And I already recorded this once, so I'll just do the same name. Okay, so now when I try to preview the bake here, you should have noticed a slight difference. We have the shading for the high poly pipe, but the curvature is still mismatched. The bake doesn't actually, make up for the curvature. So I'm saying this because a lot of people think they can just decimate curvature, but it's not going to fix anything. You might get decent shading, but it's still not going to look as natural because it's kind of blocky. So what you want to do is make sure the curvature matches, even if the poly count is a bit higher. Unless it's super extreme, I'd always recommend trying to keep the curvature as close as possible. Even if you go from a bevel to like a chamfer, that's probably okay. It's still not going to be perfect though. So it kind of depends on how obvious your object is, how much you really think you need to match the curvature. If it's a really big item and a big focus point, you might want to keep the curvature nice and matched. But if it was something like this that's kind of in the background, maybe you could get away with something simple like this where the curvature is a bit mismatched.